Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Good Bloke, Not Bloke podcast, where we explore healthy masculinity from many different perspectives. In this episode, I'm going to be interviewing a wonderful man, David Broadhurst, just a real legend in safety here in Australia, who's done an enormous amount of work to really help crews step up and step into their power and do great work. So I just want to give you a little bit of a rundown. I'm going to read off a sheet here. So with a background in the construction industry, managing the installation of pipelines in Australia and globally, David co-founded CodeSafe Solutions in 2011 to bridge the communication gap between the office and the field. CodeSafe developed an award-winning experiential learning process and digital platform evaluated by RMIT to improve worker engagement and knowledge transfer. Now part of Deep Space AI, he collaborates with organizations to improve work design and harness worker experience and knowledge to then transfer this expertise via a method that honors people's preferred learning styles. The very foundation of Deep Space AI is to equip projects and workers with the skills, tools, and early insights data to build confidence and competence, and in doing so, deliver successful projects. As a specialist in worker engagement, David contributes to thought leadership panels, including industry advisory groups, and presents to conferences and seminars on issues of social justice and responsibility. He is a passionate advocate for holistic health and well-being, initially creating a men's event and a workspace program to stop the anxiety and depression epidemic across communities. The Have a Chat initiative provides awareness and resources that empower and equip people while they are well, so that they know how to stay well. And that very much aligns with my philosophy on this whole area. Outside of Deep Space AI, David likes to keep fit through running and other outdoor pursuits. Originally from England, he came to Australia to contest the Victorian Professional Athletics Circuit, where he competed successfully in metropolitan and regional centres. So David is just a deeply passionate bloke. He's a good fun person to be around as well. So I'm looking forward to this podcast conversation. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to this next episode of the Good Bloke Not Woke podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Today I'm chatting with David Broadhurst, who's been doing incredible work right across the industry for a number of years. He's so people-focused, but he's also, like me, shares an incredible passion for personal responsibility. So I can't wait to hear his perspectives, and we might sort of bounce off each other a little bit.
Or not.
Or not. We might even butt heads. You never know. But
No,
David, welcome to the podcast.
no, thanks, mate. I don't think that's going to happen too much because I think we're cut from a very similar cloth, mate.
Yeah,
And
I think so. So I'd
no,
love to sort of get you to sort of, I suppose, reveal to my listeners what's been your path. How did you get to where you are right now?
probably more probably luck than good judgment, I think, mate. All right, so quick bio. So I was born and raised in north of England, up on the Scottish border. Hence the accent. Got involved in athletics when I was a young kid. My dad was a professional runner. So alongside running a successful civil construction business, so we were brought up in a farming community. Let's say just below the Scottish border. So nothing too fancy, so it was just get the job done. But came out to Australia when I was about 25, back in 1989 to do the professional running circuit over here. So I'd done a pretty good job of winning a number of events over in the UK. So some bright spark at training one night said you should go and try your hand at the Aussie circuit, and I was supposed to be coming for 4 months, and that was 35 years ago. So that's what brought me to Australia, was the professional running originally. And came over here, got married, had a couple of kids, got divorced, got remarried again. Jackie had a lad when we got together, and so I'm the proud dad of 3 kids and the pop of 2 grandsons nowadays. So
Fantastic. With your running for a start, we've never talked about this, but you must know Evan Armstrong and Rod Butters. Did you come across those blokes in the professional running?
yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's quite a tight fraternity. And a lot of people don't realize, and it's quite ironic, really, that there's actually more money in amateur athletics than there is in professional athletics.
Yeah.
But how you make the money in professional athletics is actually first over the line. You win the prize money, which as soon as you, and I won my first prize money at 14, so I lost my amateur status in the UK at 14. So I could never run for me county, I could never run for me country in amateur athletics because I'd already become a professional. Which I wouldn't advise too well at the time, but anyway, it got me to where I am today. So, but yeah, just a great bunch of people. And even where I live now in Abbotsford, John, when we first moved into the apartment complex, I'm talking to a bloke in the coffee shop, and we were chatting about, oh yeah, yeah, blah blah blah. And I said, I came out here to do pro running. He said, oh really? He said, when were you a pro runner? I said, oh, back in 89, 90. He said, I used to be a pro runner. Anyway, me and him used to run together. He was a sprinter, I was a middle distance runner.
Wow.
It's a bloody small world, I tell you.
That is. Well, yeah, I used to have rooms at the Richmond Hill Sports Medicine Clinic. I was the resident physiologist. And
Right.
in the little room next door to me, they had about 6 speedballs. And at 4 o'clock every afternoon, Evan Armstrong had his runners in there and they would drive me insane. I'd have to go home early. It's these bloody
Yeah.
speedballs, you know.
Yeah.
It was quite ironic. But also, I think my brother's son in 2008 or 2009 won the mile at Stawell.
Right.
That
Yeah.
was
Well,
his.
that was my distance. I was half mile and mile.
Yeah, wow. There you go. Well, mate, it's a small world. So tell us about the work you're doing now.
All right. Well, again, I started working in civil construction when blokes didn't turn up for work for me dad. So I used to get pulled out of bed at 13, 14-year-old. And instead of going to school, I was put on an excavator and told, right, this is your maths lesson, son. I want you to count how many buckets of material you put into that truck and how many trucks go through that gate. And if you miss one, I'll kick your ass. John, I loved it. I've loved our industry from the second I got a chance to work in it.
Wow.
It's a very different industry now, but it's still a great industry, and there's still some really great characters that you come across within the civil, well, any part of the construction industry, really. But yeah, that's how I got into it. Came over here to do the running. I'd specialised in the UK and around the world on large diameter pipelines, which I was taught to do really well by a bunch of Irish lads back in the UK many moons ago, and then specialised in large diameter pipeline work from the minute I landed in Australia, really working for Melbourne Water, Sydney Water, SA Water, a lot of the contractors that do work in that environment. And then about 15 years ago, 16 years ago, I was a superintendent on a project where a lad nearly got killed. And in a no blame culture, I could see all the fingers started to point in my direction on who they were going to blame. And I probably not so politely told them where they could stick that idea. But that sent me on a personal journey to go looking for better ways to communicate critical information for lads like me who struggle to read and write. Right? Because we get our trade because we love building stuff, not because we like reading stuff.
Yeah.
And then that within six months of coming up with an idea that we had that became code safe, that changed my career. We won some WorkSafe awards, Safe Work Australia awards. Some of our clients won international safety awards through the oil and gas sector through adopting our idea. And it was just one of them. People always say, geez, sticky notes. I wish I'd come up with that idea.
Yeah.
Right. It's a simple idea. And then people see the idea. It's like, oh, geez, why didn't I think of that? And so, and then recently we got bought out by another company called Deep Space AI, that's basically supercharged what Jackie and I, my wife, were building as our own business for the last 13 years. So,
Wow.
yeah, so we're hanging on to our hat right now while we're being supercharged through Deep Space AI.
Wow. Congratulations on that, by the way. That's no mean feat to build a business that somebody really wants to buy, you know.
Well, no, thanks, mate. And it's interesting, right? Because I remember, and again, probably alongside running the business, I got prompted, or I felt compelled to set up a charity about 6-7 years ago called Braveheart. And anyway, we were quite lucky that we got recognition through developing that. And a current affair did a national story on us. And during the interview, the lass who was interviewing us said, oh, Dave, you mentioned that you've had your own struggles with depression and mental health issues. She said, is that how bad construction is nowadays? And I said, I never suffered from depression and anxiety when I was in construction. That came from setting up my own business.
Yeah.
Right. So I said my personality and temperament suited construction. It doesn't suit everybody's temperament.
Yeah.
So we've got to be careful that we don't try and drive a square peg into a round hole because we're desperate for people to put in a seat.
Yeah.
And so I get quite passionate and often quite vocal that what are we doing to make sure we're choosing the right person for the role so that we don't set them up for failure. And then the whole Braveheart program was looking at let's stop talking mental health, because 85% of what's in the mental health bucket, based on the Productivity Commission's report, is not mental health.
Yeah.
It's life stress and anxiety that people haven't been given a strategy to deal with.
Yeah.
And that's when normal life stress and anxiety is left undealt with, it becomes something worse. But most of it we can stop way upstream of what we're doing right now. So I get really passionate about that, and I'm glad that the guys who bought our business, they didn't know about Braveheart when they took us on, and when they did, they said, "Wow, like how do we give this away, David?"
Yeah.
Right. And so we've got the support, not only, and we've got to be commercially viable to make sure we can help people, but we've been able to roll the what used to be the Braveheart charity program into our commercial offering, that now, because it's becoming legislation, we can offer a full project life cycle risk mitigation solution that covers both physical and psychological risk factors.
Yeah. Wow.
So it's been a wild ride, mate, and I don't think it's stopped yet.
Yeah, just that whole mental health thing. How many things get thrown under the mental health category that really they're not a mental health problem. They're just somebody needs some tools, some training, some care to learn how to strategize or work their way through a life situation, you know?
Absolutely.
And when
Yeah,
people feel like they're stuck or they're trapped, well, then sure, there's a bit of fight or flight comes up, some anxiety and some distress, but that doesn't mean they're sick, and
exactly.
the whole community, it's like has swallowed up this idea that there's this terrible mental health pandemic. And I look at it and I go, hang on a minute, we're richer than we've ever been. We've got everything we need, apart from a very tiny percentage of society. We're safe. There's no risk of war or terrible cataclysmic threat. So there's actually no justifiable reason why people should be so distressed. So there's something we're not looking at, we're not dealing with.
Yeah, well, this is a really good, and it's a good segue, right? Because whenever I go and do now have a chat toolbox talks across the industry, and I did one a year or two back at quite a posh all boys school in Malvern, and they said, "Oh, David, we've heard about your program. Can you come and do a talk to all our 125 year 12 boys?" And I'm like, "Yeah, all right then." So I go along, and I often get corrected afterwards for using too many swear words, but I'm sure they can get over it. They've never heard them words before, right? But the analogy I give these guys, I said, right, guys, I said, let me paint you a word picture, because we think in pictures, we don't think in words. And I said, how many of you guys go to the gym? And about 3/4 of them put their hand up. And I said, right, as of tomorrow, you can go to the gym, but you're not allowed to put any weights on the bar. And I just stood there quietly. And next thing you could hear him snickering and laughing. And I said, anyway, I picked one. I said, what are you laughing about? He goes, well, how much stronger are we going to get if we're not allowed to put weights on the bar? I said, that's a really good point you raised there. I said, so I said, if let's paint another picture, that if your brain's a muscle, and to develop a muscle, you need resistance. By us taking away all those resistance points for you young'uns, right? Do you think you're going to help develop your capacity and capability to manage more stress if we take away all those points of resistance as you're growing up? If your brain's a muscle, like you've just said, you wouldn't get any stronger if you don't put any weights on the bar. So I said, you've just acknowledged that you need resistance to build your capacity and capability to handle more. All of a sudden, the penny dropped.
Yeah.
I said, on behalf of everybody that's made it easy for you guys, I'm going to give you an apology because we've retarded your development.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
said, but here's another thing to think about. I said, when you're in the gym and you're going for a PB, is it a good idea to have a spotter or a buddy standing over you just to make sure that what you're attempting, you're not going to drop it and break your nose or do some damage to yourself? Do you think it's a good idea to find yourself a buddy or a spotter in life? You need a coach. You need somebody that, you know what, because like you've got no idea what life's going to throw at you, but you need a buddy that you can go to say, hey, I'm having a crack at this. I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone, but can you guide us through it? Can you be there with me? Right. And you don't have to have a degree. You don't even have to have a bloody mental health first aider certificate to do that.
Yeah.
Right. And all of a sudden the guy, every one of them made a point of coming up to me and shaking my hand on the way out. Whew.
Yeah.
And about a third of them, and this is the sad bit, John, a third of them said, Brody, why is nobody else telling us this?
Yeah.
Why is nobody else telling us this? They're all wanting to put us on medication and say, oh, you've got exams coming up, you're stressed out, you need to take a week off. And I'm like, yeah, what we're doing, we're just sending you around the mountain again and again and again because you have to get to the next level of capacity and capability. I said, because life will not go easy on you.
Yeah.
And I said, and if you've got a purpose, which most people have, everybody's got a purpose.
Yeah.
Right? One of my favorite Mark Twain quotes is, the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you work out why.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But when you find out your why, you've got to have the resistance and the capacity and capability to go through what you're going to have to go through to fulfill your purpose while on Earth.
Yeah.
Because
It's
it
like
won't.
the old Zen Buddhist quote that says, a ship is safe in the harbor, but
Yeah,
that's not what ships are for. Yeah.
they're not built to be in the harbor, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you're right, mate. It's like with the boys. I mean, I go out to my old school, Marsland College, every year and talk to the boys. And we've had some days where we've had very strong emotional connections. And the really cool part about that school is they never ever try to tell me what to say, and they never ask me what I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
They just say, "Come and do it. Give
Yeah.
us what you got this time." So you know what? I never ever plan what I'm going to say when I go there. I'll wait till I'm in the room and I can feel this bunch of lads, and I just sort of know where to go with it. And it always
Yeah.
ends up in a great
Well,
place.
because John, it's not what you do, it's who you are,
Mm,
right? You don't have to write a script, right? Because it's in your heart, right? It's
mm,
not in your head, it's in your heart. And people pick up on that from 1,000 yards. Right.
yeah,
So and kudos to you, mate, that you've lived it. You're not and this is what I often get a little bit frustrated when I see people jumping on the mental health bandwagon,
mhm,
because every man and his dog's a bloody expert nowadays. And I'm
mm,
like, all right, great, where's your lived experience and where's your evidence that you know what you're talking about and you've actually had an impact?
yeah,
And more, and it's like, because and this is what and I won't use the right words in this podcast, but it annoys me because people get brought in and exposed to a program that's had all the guts pulled out of it,
mm,
that makes the difference, like mindfulness, right? And things like if you understood true mindfulness, you can't sell it into a commercial environment for 6 weeks, right? But what happens is people come out of the other end of those programs still feeling the same, or maybe, oh geez, I must be really broken because that was supposed to fix me.
yeah,
And it's like, you know what? You guys are actually contributing to this issue right now, because what you're doing, you're not telling the real story. You're sugarcoating it for people, and
yeah. It's
people need to know the real deal. There's some work to be done.
so true, mate. I'm right with you there on setting people up for the mental activity that degrades them. As soon as the negative self-talk and the self-criticism come in, that's when blokes start to degrade themselves, and then they end up behaving like a degraded person,
It's
And
all
it's
self-talk, Matt. It's
you
all
know,
self.
it's like, I think that, you talk about your dad, and you probably had a good connection with your grandfather too. I am constantly sort of reminded that, the speed of change in life over the last 40 years has been gobsmacking,
Yeah, it's
and we talk
accelerating.
about how people go on about how AI is going to take people's jobs and all that sort of stuff. And people who say that stuff don't understand human beings,
No.
because they were saying exactly the same thing when computers were coming in or before computers came in. And look what happened. we created industries that nobody'd ever thought of before. And it's going to happen with the AI as well. But what I wanted to go back to and sort of pick your brain and your thoughts on this is that, I had a close connection with my mum's dad. And I've talked about him a bit on the podcast before, and I feel a bit ripped off because I moved to Melbourne when I was 10 years old. He still lived up in Toowoomba in Queensland. So I got to see him once a year,
Yeah.
And by the time I was getting smart enough to the point where I needed to pick his brain, I was 24 when he passed away,
Yeah.
And so I never got to experience the richness, but he did leave his memoirs behind. And he talked about his life from when he was in his early 20s. His father and him and his two brothers decided to go on this quest. They moved from Angaston in South Australia, where they owned Saltram Wines, and they went to the Darling Downs near Roma, and they bought a lot of land and built 3 cattle stations.
Bloody hell. I worked on a gas pipeline up near Roma.
Yeah, gotcha. Well,
they probably drunk some of their wine.
Well, mate, you may be. Well, they didn't grow wine up there. They went beef cattle.
Oh, really?
So, I was born in Surat Base Hospital, right? And so they had to fence it all. They had to organise water. They had to dig septic tanks. They had to build houses. They had to cut timber to build houses. And I think about their lives of on a day-to-day basis having to overcome hardship.
Yes.
And you talked about the schoolboys, how you make them lift weights with no plates, It's like sometimes he had 3 plates either side and no spotter.
Yeah.
And no choice, and it's like the strength of my grandfather's character was so profound, and he was such a decent man, to the point where my mum's mother was a devout Catholic, and my grandfather was not really interested in religion at all. And my grandmother grew all the flowers, and she was in charge of keeping the flowers up on the altar at the church. And whenever you walked into that church, the flower arrangement was stunning. My grandfather grew those flowers because he had his wife's back.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just think that the character that he forged for himself and the character of the 4 daughters he raised.
Well, it's what it is, John. The thing I love, it's that typical saying, more's caught than taught. Right? It's like, I'm too busy watching what you're doing to listen to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Right? Carrying an Australian passport. Right? I love that. My missus knows that to get me out of work, the best way to get me out of work is to get me an Australian war history book for Christmas.
Right. Wow.
And I love reading about the Anzacs, right? And my whole thing is, how do we get the Anzac spirit back into our workplaces? How do we get the Anzac spirit back into sporting clubs? How do we get the Anzac spirit back into our society and not wait for a catastrophic event to forge it?
Oh, man.
Right? Because I love it, right? Because it's, you know what? And as that generation, your granddad, like there was an old mate of mine, I met him when I was building a pipeline from Cardinia down to Pearsdale back in 99, 2000 for Melbourne Water. Anyway, we had to go through Acuna Park in Berwick, which was the showgrounds, Berwick Showground, and it was pristine. Now, all the guys on the committee of that showground were all farmers. Right, and the chairman of the committee was a fellow called Jack Ray. Right now, Jack, when I met Jack, he was in his 70s. Right, so that's what 24 years ago, 25 years ago. Right. Anyway, so Jack's in his 70s, and basically the company couldn't get access. Anyway, they knew I come from farming stock, so they said, Brody, we're going to give you that section to look after. We can't deal with them lads; they're too hard to deal with. Anyway, so I drive up and so, can I have a meeting with Jack? Yeah. And it's salt of the earth, right? His farm used to own all the land that Narry Warren now sits on.
Right. Wow.
And he was the ringmaster for Melbourne Show for like 25, 30 years.
Wow.
Right? So they said, and one guy said to us one, he said, have you got any idea who you're dealing with, Davey? They used to call me Davey. I said, no, I don't. He said, if we've got aristocracy in Australia, that's about as close as you're going to get to it. And I'm like, Cool. And old Jack runs around in an old ute. He's got a kelpie in the back. He's got a bloody chainsaw hanging off a piece of string, right? And this guy, so I met him, and I'm like, he goes, I've looked at the plans of what you're going to do through my park. I don't like it. I don't like what I'm seeing, David. I said, so which part don't you like, Jack? The part where I'm going to come in and demolish it, or the part that I'm going to be in there with large machinery where I can do a shitload of work for you for nothing while I'm in there? He goes, explain that last bit to me again. Anyway, what some of the things I can't probably share in public domain. What jobs I used to do for him, because some of them were questionable, but it saved him a lot of money and a lot of time, and it saved some of his troops, as he used to call them. There was one guy during lambing season, he lost about 6 ewes, and mass was about 85. Anyway, Jack came to me one day and said, Davey, he said, you're digging a big hole to put that big pipe in. He said, do you think there's any chance we could lose a couple of dead ewes in that trench? He said, because Mars is getting a bit old to dig a hole to bury him himself. I said, I bring him along, mate. I'll find somewhere to stick him that won't impact the compaction tests. So, but every Friday without fail, and I had about 15, 20, because we were a special crossings crew. So we were only a small crew, but we did all the fiddly stuff on the project. Anyway, every Friday night without fail, he'd open up the committee rooms and he'd bring fish chips and a case of beer for my guys.
Wow.
And I went to that lad's funeral. We become best mates.
Wow.
And what I learned from that guy, because he became my Australian granddad.
Wow.
Right. But it's that era, it's that A Fortunate Life, AC Facey, right? I read that book one Christmas, right? That book should be part of the curriculum. It should be part of the school curriculum, right?
Do you know how many businesses I've put that book on their shelf?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because people have got to remember, and again, maybe because I'm a new Australian, so I maybe appreciate it more than people who were born here. But I look at what and I know it's not as good as it used to be, but I look at what we've got here in Australia that needs really, really well defending as an attitude, right? It's like, you know what, guys, we are known for something. We are known for our Anzac spirit.
Yeah.
Right now, how do we release that into the environments that we find ourselves in, because it's a privilege.
Yeah.
Right, it's a privilege, right? That you look at what people have done, like whether it's AC Facey, because he went over to Western Australia when he was 8-year-old.
Yeah.
Right.
I know.
To keep his auntie company, because his uncle was out for weeks on end fencing their paddock that they got given as a war hero coming back, right? Developed the whole bloody wheat belt of Western Australia off the back of he has 500 acres. Thanks for serving for your country. Now go and see what you can do with it. Right?
Yeah.
And another great book. I don't know whether you've ever read it, John, and whether any of your listeners are interested. But it was the Cattle King.
Didn't read it. No.
Sir Sidney Kidman.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Same thing. He left Adelaide when he was about 11-year-old on a one-eyed horse called Cyclops, and he went looking for his older brother who'd gone roustabouting out in country South Australia. He became the biggest landowner in Australia at the turn of the 19th, 20th century. Right. But if you check out Sir Sidney Kidman, he knocked about with all the indigenous guys when he was a stockman with his brother, and he learned where all the watering holes were, and he learned how to get this cattle from the middle of Australia to the stockyards on the coasts. And by the time they got there, they were fully fed, watered, and they were in prime condition.
Wow.
And he absolutely. But again, it's about that pioneering spirit. It's about, you know what, life is meant to be a struggle, but when you get through the struggle, you'll feel so much better about yourself.
Yeah.
Because you know what, we need adversity.
Oh man.
We
absolutely
need.
Yeah. I mean, it's adversity is fuel for growth, right?
Yeah, in the right measure. There's a caveat, right?
Yeah, well, of course. And I think that, well, you look at the Anzacs. I mean, Gallipoli killed a lot of them, and then a lot of them came back, with a pride in themselves for what they'd done, and they say that I've heard a couple of people talk about how after the First World War, there was less PTSD because these guys came home by ship and they
Yeah.
had weeks and weeks
Yeah.
of
Time to
sitting on the ship
decompress, right?
talking it out with their mates,
Yeah.
talking it out.
Yeah.
Whereas after Vietnam and the Second World War, they came home on
Yeah.
a plane, and they were all of a sudden amongst people who didn't understand.
Yeah.
And I wonder, in terms of how we get it back. I mean, you and I can go and talk to every bunch of boys in every school, but I'm putting a lot of attention on football clubs at the moment because I reckon football clubs are a great place where this can be created. For example, the Marcel and Old Collegians Footy Club where I played, I'm involved in a new coterie group there from some of my mates who I played footy with and who I went to school with. And then the club is struggling because they're not getting a feed from the school anymore. All the schoolboys are going to have to play district footy because they can get paid,
Mm.
whereas
Yeah.
the old boys play in the amateurs.
Yeah.
And so one of the things they're instituting is that all the players, all the senior players at the old boys will now be taking up coaching positions in the junior teams at the school. So they don't just get to play for the club, they've actually got to be in service to the school. And in doing so, building relationships. And I feel like that's a really healthy start. Now, I want to get in there and help them to learn skills to be better mentors, so they can help carry that forward. But I
Yeah.
wonder how we do it in workplaces.
Well, I think what it is, mate, it's about, and in most of my career, John, because I'd served my apprenticeship when I was 13, 14 with my dad. By the time I actually got into a workplace where I was working for McAlpines and Murphy's, who were big Irish pipeline companies, at 17, 18, 19, I'd already served my apprenticeship. So I got my first leading hands job at 18.
Wow.
So I'm running a crew of all the guys were older than me, right? And what I had to learn really quickly, and I learned it through my section supervisor called Eddie Ryan. I'll never forget this, mate. And I've tried to carry this with me through my entire career. But he because I was a young lad, I was trying to prove myself, and guys would do the job, and I said, "Nah, get out of the road. That's not how you do it. This is how you do it," right? Anyway, somebody obviously gave him a bit of feedback, and he pulled me out of the trench. He said, "Brody, get up here." Big Irish accent, right? Anyway, he goes, "I've got some advice for you." I said, "What's that?" He said, "If you don't pull your head in, the lads are going to bury you." And I'm like, "Yeah, but Eddie, they don't know what." He said, "If you don't pull your head in, they're going to bury you." And I'm like, "Oh, all right then." So, but and just as he decided to walk away, and this guy was a scary guy, right? He had hands on him like bloody shovels, right? He said, "I want you to remember one thing, David." He said, "If you're gonna follow your career into supervisory and super," he said, "lads don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." I got that advice at 18,
Wow.
and at the time I didn't know what. No, I had no idea what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Right, but if I think well, it took me a year or two to start reflecting on what he was like because he was a really hard taskmaster.
Yeah.
One of the hardest, right? Yeah, we used to get a long weekend every 6 weeks back then. You left at lunchtime Friday. You had to be back by 6 o'clock Tuesday.
Right.
Every 6 weeks, right? But he knew if one of his crew were having a few challenges at home, which all of us did from time to time, because you've got misses, you've got kids, you've got mortgages, you've got all sorts of shit going on, right? He'd say, if it was me, he'd say, "Right, Brody, get on, get your shit sorted out. Your mind's not on the job. I'll see you back here Tuesday morning. Don't be late." And he'd let us go without telling the company, because the company would have fired us on the spot. But he'd cover for us because he knew that we had stuff to deal with. And that same guy, John, my first week that and to give you an idea, right? I'm a 17-year-old. I'm clear. So this is back in early 80s, right? I'm clearing £150 a week. Right. My best mate who's back home doing his electrical apprenticeship, he's grossing £35 a week.
Wow.
So I was making stupid. We were working long hours and we were putting some hard yards in, but we were making bloody good money, right? But what Eddie did first week, he said, Brody, give me your wage packet. And I'm like, oh, shit. I've done nothing. Anyway, brown paper bag full of cash. He goes, how much are your digs? I said, £25 a week, Eddie. Right on. Counts it out. Right. Young lad like you shouldn't need any more than £25 a week spending money. He said, this £100, I'm going to take it and bank it for you. He said, and I'm going to give it to you at the end of the job.
Wow.
He taught me how, he said, because most lads in our game have got nothing to show for it when they finish the job. And they're actually in more trouble financially than what they were when they started working for us.
Yeah.
Right. And he caught me early enough that I finished that first job I was on when I was just turned 19. I bought my first cottage.
Wow.
Right. And it was, so everything I do, it's a legacy to that fella.
Yeah. What was his name?
Eddie Ryan.
Eddie Ryan.
Yeah. But the same guy, if you're in, we used to have a little a smashed up old caravan that used to tow along as the pipeline was going, so you didn't have too far to go for smoke, all right. And if any lad was in there 5 minutes longer than he should have been, Eddie would jump out of his car, he'd grab him by the scruff of the neck and the belt, and he'd throw him out of the caravan. But the same bloke would let you get home if you needed to get home and sort some stuff out.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. And to me, it's like firm but fair. Firm but fair. Right?
It's so interesting, isn't it? I've got a really good mate in WA who I'm sure you would love. His name's John Anea. And John was actually the radiographer at Richmond Hill Clinic when I was working there. And he was also playing footy for Richmond Footy Club. And he left at the end of 86 to go to Western Australia, where he was from, to be the inaugural vice captain of the West Coast Eagles. And he had a great career there, and he's been very successful as a physiotherapist. And we were talking about the young players in the AFL. And he said he wanted to get a program to teach these young guys that when they look at what they're earning money-wise, to then look at what their mates are earning who are doing apprenticeships, and say to them, make yourself live off what your mates are earning and put the rest away.
Yeah.
Because if your mates can do it, you can do it.
Exactly. Well, I'll tell you, this is something, because again, I inherited a son, right? And when Jackie and I got together, that was my biggest fear, because I was brought up in a very, very abusive household, right? I was hospitalized a handful of times. My mum was hospitalized on numerous occasions.
Sorry to hear that.
And so, but again, it makes you who you are, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know what? I wouldn't choose it, but this is who I am, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I get really passionate about. Let's deal with the real issues around domestic violence, not just put a band-aid over it. Right?
Well, just a little point there. You know, one of my greatest teachers, Harry Palmer, says, you know, you're not depressed because of what happened to you in the past. You're depressed because of your perception of what happened to you in the past.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
you can choose that part.
Well, that's a really good point, right? Because, and again, it's the spin you put, it's the self-talk, right? Because I used to box, I used to be an amateur boxer.
Right.
And my coach used to say all the time, Brody, how did you not go down? I said, I've been conditioned to take a punch since I was about 5.
Yes, exactly. It's like that great scene
I've been conditioned since I was about 5. I can take a punch. Right.
It's like that great scene out of Raging Bull where Jake LaMotta says to Sugar Ray Robinson, after he gives him a horrendous beating, he says, "Hey, Ray, you didn't get me down, Ray."
Exactly. Well, I was talking to a lad recently, and he said, like, I'm same as yourself, I'm 61 now, right?
Yeah.
But every now and again, you go out and somebody wants to have a bit of a dig. And I'm like, mate, I might not win the fight, but you'll know you've been in one.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I said you can keep going if you want. But anyway, they usually back down at that point.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? I mean, I want to get back to what you're saying about your stepson.
Yeah,
before, but it's a bit like you know, the funny thing about fear and unwillingness. I was good mates with a fellow by the name of John Vickery, and John's a very charismatic bloke, good-looking man. You know, he's always trained, and his son played quite a few games at Richmond and then Hawthorn. And Johnny, along with his day job, he used to work security at night, and he often ran the security at one of Melbourne's most famous nightclubs, the Underground, and he did the security on his own oftentimes.
Yeah.
And whenever, if the violence started, Johnny didn't mind because he actually liked it. You know, he's one of those
Yeah,
guys,
you get
and
like that.
yeah, and he's one of those guys you don't want to fight because he likes it, right? But
Mm.
I said to him
And they can
once,
do it, and they're good at it, right?
yeah, like I said to him once, were you ever scared? And he said, yeah, I was once. He goes, I was really scared once. And I said, what happened? He said, well, there was these five blokes came in and they pushed their way in through the front door, and they were known people in Melbourne there, and they're all boxers.
Mm.
And I won't mention their names, but they're quite famous names, two of them, they're brothers.
Mm.
And he said they stood there, and I stood in the internal doorway and said, sorry, guys, you can't come in. And he said, I knew who they were and I knew what they were capable of. And they just looked at me and said, well, we're coming in anyway, so get out of the way if you don't want to get hurt. And he
Mm.
said, in that doorway, there was a slot in the wall, and I always kept a piece of 4x2 in there. And he said, I pulled the piece of 4x2 out, and he said, I was so scared. He said, I was so scared. He said, okay, come on in then, but just know one of you is going to die.
And I don't
He
care
said,
which one.
they stood there for a little while and then they left.
Exactly. Well, at the end of the day, a human always goes back to self-preservation, right?
Exactly.
That's that Darwinism. You know
Yeah.
what? Self-preservation. You know, let's maybe take another tact on this. So, but getting back to our lad,
Yeah.
when we're on about the finance stuff, and Dave's grown up with us doing the Braveheart charity and doing the global research on where people get their stress factors from. And anyway, he wanted to follow in my footsteps and get into civil construction. And his mum came up one day and said, oh, look, I haven't told you this, but Dave's going to ask you at tea tonight whether you can get him a job in civil construction because he wants to follow in your footsteps, right? And keep in mind, like, I raised him from when he was about 4 months old, right? And anyway, I said to Jackie, I said, my biggest fear hooking up with you is I know I can love you. I just don't know whether I can love your son
Mm.
and whether I'm going to do him damage because of what I was brought up with. They talk about the abused becoming the abuser.
Mm.
Because in my first marriage, I had two daughters. So I could handle daughters, right? But the whole dad-son thing, that's a different dynamic altogether. Anyway, I said, so I said, if you trust me with him, then let's start courting and let's see where this thing goes. So we've been married 20 years now.
Wow.
Anyway, but when he was about 14, he come to us one day and said, oh, well, so he's called David, right? David Monty. He goes, oh, Dad, what do you have to do to change your name? I said, why? What's wrong with David? No. He said, I want to be a Broadhurst.
Wow.
I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I don't like Chatham. I want to be a Broadhurst. Mum's a Broadhurst. You're a Broadhurst. I want to be a Broadhurst. And I'm
Wow.
like, I said, you're gonna have to get permission from your father. And he went to his father that he didn't see much of, and his father said, not a chance. So anyway, he come back, oh, he won't give us permission. I said, I think you're gonna have to wait till you're 18, mate. As soon as you turn 18, you can do whatever you want. So anyway, on the morning of his 18th birthday, he comes out of his bedroom and we're like, oh, happy birthday, blah, blah. He said, oh, Mum, can you just sign this? And Jackie's like, what's this? He said, oh, it's me document for me to change my name.
Wow. Isn't that amazing?
Anyway, so I'm bawling, Mum's bawling, he's bawling, right? So anyway, but he sits down, Dad, I want you to get me a job in civil construction. I want to follow in your footsteps. I said, no, you don't, mate. He goes, what do you mean? I said, look, I feel really honored that you want to follow in my footsteps. I said, but there are different footprints today than what I got into 45 years ago. I said, let me give you a statistic. I said, the biggest suicide risk is 16 to 25-year-olds working in construction. I said, so what sort of dad would I be to plonk you right into the middle of that environment where I know that your suicide risk is going to go off the charts?
Yeah.
And he goes, yeah, that's a good point. He said, yeah, but I've been doing all that stuff you've been talking about with Braveheart for years. He said, I think I'll be all right. I said, mate, oh, another thing is, because we used to call him our sloth.
Uh-huh.
Right. He's always been very compliant and he's always been very good, but he does it at his own pace, not at mine or Jackie's pace, because we're high D's, right? Anyway, I said, mate, but I don't think you don't have the temperament for capital works. I think you've got temperament for ops and maintenance. He goes, what's the difference? I said, pace. He goes, all right. I said, have a look at the peripheral. Anyway, he went and got a landscaping apprenticeship, right? His
Right.
second year landscaping, and he's loving it. He's top of his class at TAFE, which I keep telling him I can take credit for that, because then high marks you got for doing that concrete slab. You were edging concrete at 6 like I was. So
Yeah.
anyway, and so anyway, he finally said, right, I said, right, mate, you're making your own money. You need to start looking at getting out of the nest, right? Mum wants to hang on to him forever. Dad's saying, right, your time's up, mate. Get out there. Anyway, and he said, oh, I'm going to apply for an apartment. I don't want to share, I don't want to share with anybody. I said, mate, you can't afford it. Oh, no, I've done my budget. I don't know. Oh, really? Anyway, I said, well, look, I said, it's good practice for you. I said, put in some applications. Don't get too disillusioned if you don't get it. I said, because you've got professional couples who can't get an apartment nowadays in Melbourne. So I said, just give it do it, use it as a practice, use it as an experience, learn the process, then you'll land somewhere. He gets the first one he applied for.
Wow.
All right. I said, mate, how did you pull that off? He said, well, you know how you talk about my budget and you talk about all these stress factors in your program. He said, when I started making the money, especially on the union jobs where I'm making some weeks he was making more than I was getting paid, right, as a second year bloody apprentice. And he said, but what I did, he said, I went and signed up to my budget. He said, so what they do for me is exactly what Eddie Ryan did for you.
Right. Yeah.
I said, really? So I know Tammy Barton. Tammy Barton does a phenomenal job for people in Australia around helping them with their finances, but most people only go to them when they're in trouble with creditors.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Well, what David done, he'd rung them and said, hey, I'm an apprentice. I need somebody to help me with my finances. Do you guys do that? And they said, oh yeah, for so much a month, we'll handle all your finances. Right? So they take his money, they pay all his bills, they give him spending money, and they save some for him.
Yeah.
Right? But because he had that in place, when he applied for the apartment, and the agent and the landlord saw how well organized he was as a second year apprentice, he got the apartment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm
so
like,
much, doesn't it?
And for me, it's like, you know what? It's teaching these younguns and even older people. Like I got into my 40s and 50s before I started to learn a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Right. But from a finance point of view, certainly in construction, because one of the key issues is there's no job security in that industry ever. And what Eddie did for me when I was 17, 18 was, mate, you need to set up a rainy day fund, because in this industry, you'll be out of work for 3 or 4 months every winter.
Yeah.
Right. So you got to put hay in the barn for when there's no grass out there in the field.
Yeah.
Right. So he always, and I think I learned it from Eddie, that he always, well, Jesus did it, right? He taught in parables, he taught in stories.
Yeah.
Right. In a way that, and people, and that makes sense. Yeah, that's why we put hay in the barn. It's hard work, but if you don't put hay in the barn, your bloody cattle, your sheep and your cattle are dead, because you've got food to give them, right? Same concept around finances.
And it's so interesting because it's like in that there's a goal, and having something to work towards, rather than just sort of existing in this moment, and I feel like when somebody's got their attention on where they're going, they're less likely to get distracted by shiny objects like social media, like
absolutely
gambling,
right,
and those sorts of things.
And I think you're absolutely right, mate, because it's about how do we make sure that our kids aren't susceptible to predators?
Yeah.
Right, because there's predators everywhere.
Right.
But if you can give your kids, and even older, if you can give people a bit of self-respect, self-image. I remember, and I've never written a book, but I got quoted in a book that's I believe is Amazon's number 4 bestseller safety book in the world.
Right.
And how I met this guy, Kevin Burns, over in Canada, I put a post on LinkedIn one day and I just put, valued people value safety.
Yeah.
And he messaged me. He said, David, he said, where did you get that quote, Connor? Where did you get that quote from? And can we have a Teams meeting? And the book is for supervisors, right? And so he said, Brody, can I record this? Can I quote you in my book? I said, yeah, as long as I get some royalties, mate. So I never got the royalties, but the book is the book is called People Works.
Right.
It's probably one of the best books a supervisor can ever get their hands on, on how to create a psychologically safe environment for their people to operate within.
Yeah, gotcha. Wow.
Right.
Oh, it's good. I'm glad you mentioned it. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you can take care of, and this is where even before it was legislated, right, psychological safety was always a thing,
Mm, yeah.
right? Eddie Ryan knew it was a thing 45 years ago when he used to send lads home to get the stuff sorted out because he knew their mind wasn't on the job.
Yeah. Yeah. What's so interesting, I mean, what you talk about Eddie Ryan, it's like that's the tough love type stuff, and I think there's a confusion nowadays where people think that if you're being tough, you're being unfair.
Mm,
But, that's such a delusional thing. I mean, that
yeah.
whole Anzac spirit came from people having to do stuff that was so tough. I've talked before about how I did some seminars for some Vietnam veterans, and I called them out and some stuff. And I just said, you guys don't understand how special you are, because at some point you had to look death right in the eye and then walk towards it.
Mm,
What a gift that is, that you survived that and you can come back to this world with that, knowing that you actually have that amount of courage,
yeah. Yeah.
And I feel that, somewhere, across the world right now, any form of masculinity is being labeled as toxic masculinity, but that's just
It's wrong.
activists and outsiders, and really they're not the quality people we want running society, but they seem to have a very loud voice for whatever reason. But
Mm.
stepping back into teaching young men how to be masculine and how to, I think there's a couple of points there. I mean, Jordan Peterson said a man should be dangerous, but he should know how to control it.
Well,
It's
it's the word Prouse,
yeah, huh?
right? If you go, Prouse is power under control.
Yeah, wow.
Right. The word Prouse is used in very much in equestrian, where you've got a horse underneath you that's got phenomenal amounts of power,
Yeah,
but you've got to know how to harness that power, right? The horse has Prouse, it has presence.
yeah.
It gives off an energy, right? And you, I'm sure you've seen it. When you walk in a room, you can tell who's got Prouse. People just give off an energy,
Mhm.
right? And it's power under control, right?
Yeah,
What guys haven't had, and I'm doing some really exciting work with the Jesuit Social Services on this around their men's project initiative, because sadly a lot of guys haven't had a good father figure,
hmm,
right? If it wasn't for my best mate's dad and my granddad, who I lived with for a number of years because of the abuse that was going on at home, I would be I don't know whether I'd be alive today, to be quite honest,
yeah, yeah,
right? But my best mate's dad, he'd give us a hug, but he'd also give us a kick up the ass when he knew and when we knew we were doing something we shouldn't have been doing, right? So, but so it was under control. My dad, there was no control. It was just erratic, right? And
yeah,
it's scary. But I think though, so the Jesuit Social Services stuff, they've for 20 odd years, they've been running a men's project initiative where it's helping guys understand how unhealthy links with what they call the content of the man box drives all sorts of damaging and inappropriate social and personal behavior.
yeah,
And it's because it's held, those beliefs and biases around masculinity are held such a subconscious and level. Guys, and my dad used to do it all the time. He'd lash out and then he'd be remorseful within 5 minutes,
yeah,
but he didn't know what was triggering the behavior.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So, and I think the reason why I'm passionate about working with the Jesuits, and not so much the pushing religion, it's like, hey, we've run this program in the judicial system and in schools for 20 years. We now want to take it into construction. David, can you help us constructionize it? And I said, well, I said, I'll give me time to that, because you're not going for behavior modification,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
You're looking at what are the core beliefs and what are the core biases that most guys have
Hmm.
based on their lived experience during their formative years, that give them an inappropriate lens to look at masculinity through, which is why there's substance abuse, domestic violence, suicide. The higher numbers are in the male population, not the female population.
Yeah.
And if we can help people understand that while people are well, to say, hey, no judgment, no shame. It just is.
Yeah, let's just get curious about it.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And where we've gone and done pilots, the feedback has been phenomenal, right?
Wow.
And he's because I know there's a lot of resentment right now across construction because there's a big push to get women in construction, right?
Mm.
Anyway, I in one of the workshops, there's about 40 people in the workshop, and probably about two-thirds are blokes, a third, maybe a higher number. Anyway, I said, all right. I said, you're saying that there's a bit of animosity certainly from the young ones on why are women getting all this preferential treatment? And I said, well, it's about making things equitable. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, let me ask you a question. I said, and this would be something for your listeners maybe. I said, when was it made illegal in Australia to rape your wife? Any idea, Matt?
I don't know. No.
Do you want to take a guess?
I'd hate to think. I mean, I perish the thought that it might have been when Lionel Murphy might have been in the High Court. I don't know. I mean, it's a bit like
How far
people are
back was that?
appalled. Sorry,
How far back was that?
in the 70s.
Right. Well, I'll tell you when it was made illegal. So people could rape the wife up until this date, and it wasn't illegal. 1991.
Get out of here! Wow.
And so when you give that statistic to people, say, now do you understand why we have to get some equity back into the relationship across male and female?
Yeah.
Because that's how rough women have had it. Right.
Mm.
And I said, and also because of the Second World War, I said, who do you think they put into the factories and into the fields when all the blokes went out to war?
Yeah.
I thought, oh, all the women. I said, do you know that from statistics, when the women were in those places, there was less IR issues, there was less safety issues, there was better productivity. So women did a better job of it than the blokes. I said, and then when all the blokes came back from war, they kicked the women back into the kitchen.
Yeah.
And the reason why they don't like them being in industries because they know they do a better job than we do. So I said, do you understand? I said, if you don't understand the history of this, you cannot get underneath what's going on, the behavior.
Mm.
If you always go for behavior modification around domestic violence, substance abuse, suicide, you'll never get to the core issue because those things will continue when the door's closed.
Yeah.
Whereas
Exactly.
if we can help men understand why they think the way they do and where those beliefs came from that was no bearing on them whatsoever,
Yeah.
right? So you can talk about it with no judgment and no shame. You can engage people in a curious conversation that we can then start changing how people engage with those beliefs and biases so that the behavior changes long term. That's what and what we're doing with deep space and AI around how those early insights can actually lead people to better decision making.
Yeah.
I'm 61 now, mate. I'm probably more energized now than I've ever been because I'm like,
Yeah.
I think we can actually have a significant crack at making a difference here.
Oh, look, I agree with you, mate. It's I was talking with somebody in England this morning about this and how, there's this real mix-up between feelings and emotions and how, we chatted about this a bit earlier, but how a feeling is just a feeling. An emotion is a response to a feeling, and that response is triggered in the mind. And whatever it is that's, as you say, a person's beliefs, whether they're conscious beliefs or they're beliefs that have become transparent because they adopted them long ago, it's the beliefs that cause their emotions to catch fire, and if they can do the work, and I think I've shared with you before, I did an enormous amount of work under Harry Palmer doing the avatar work, and that's all about being able to integrate those long lost, deeply destructive beliefs.
Yeah,
And the more of that work that you do, the more your universe quietens down and you
absolutely.
become less reactive, more present, and then you can be in service.
Yeah, yeah,
And I get a sense that in the cold, hard light of day, if you say to any man, who would you like to become, and give them some time to sort of flesh that out, to talk about who it is they'd like to be and how they'd like to be seen. And then you say, okay, so this is where you are. This is where you want to be. What's in the way? What have we got to work through here? And do you need a mentor? Do you need someone to support you to help you through that?
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting question, right? Because of those beliefs and biases are held at such a subconscious level. When you ask people that question, they wouldn't even know,
No.
right? And it's like, I know, even like how Jackie and I have survived 20 years, 13, 14 of those working together as well as living together. We've got our counselor on speed dial, right? And I'll ring John. Hey John, I'm feeling like this. I don't like how I'm feeling. Where's he coming from, and what do I do about it?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Right. And it's like but it's all about I can trust him, right? I
Yeah.
can trust him. So he doesn't come with some fluffy, hairy, fairy bloody. And when we first started seeing him, I said, mate, I said, I'm too old to piss fart about, mate. I said, I'm paying good money. I said, I'm happy to keep coming to you. I said, but you need to give me some direction, some strategy when I come knocking on your door. Don't run me around, else I'm out. I
Yeah.
said, I haven't got time to waste. I said, give it to me, both barrels right between the eyes. So,
Yeah. It's good.
but and again, it's like how do we let guys know that real courage and real bravery is exposing your underbelly?
Yeah, that's it. Well, it's like I've mentioned this on the podcast a few times. I was given a wonderful definition of vulnerability some years ago.
Mm,
And it's vulnerability is being in a space where you have absolutely no idea what to do next and being okay with that.
yeah, yeah, and that's a really, really, really difficult place for a guy to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
But
And
what's
again,
amazing is
yeah,
that's when you land there and you allow yourself to be there, that's when the golden gates open up. That's when
absolutely
your
right.
intuition speaks and you start to land in a knowing of
Yeah.
what's next, you know?
Yeah, and I think and again, we'd experiencing some pretty serious depression. I even had suicidal thoughts at one time because of the stress that the business was putting me under. I found out it was what they call situational depression, not
Hmm.
clinical depression, right?
Yeah.
But when you're in a business and you've sold everything that wasn't bolted down to, so you put all your eggs in the basket. It's like I can't change the situation, John, right?
That's right.
So if it's situation, I don't care whether it's situational depression or whatever. I can't change the situation. So how do I get through this without wanting to go and top myself, right? Because I can't see a way out, right? And he just gave us some guidance. He said, look, he said, what most people, and this is where the Have a Chat program is so powerful, right? Because most people are looking for agency,
Mm,
right? And most things, external influences, you've got no agency over them.
yeah.
And this is what Dr. Peter Miller, who helped us put this program together years ago, and Peter's pedigree, just from your listeners' point of view, she used to be an executive director at Safe Work Australia, and she wrote the first psychological safety guidance note for Australia back in June 2018.
Wow.
And that guidance note is what all the regulators are now using for their new legislation around psychosocial risk. Right. So she knew what she was doing. Right. So we were just lucky that we had a relationship with her. And so we said, well, you know what? External factors, don't touch that in the Braveheart program, David. Let's look at internal factors that people have got full agency over.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's look at the health trinity: exercise, diet, and sleep. Most people have got full agency over those three things.
Hmm.
And we know categorically that if you get, and you don't have to go mad. You're better off if you don't go mad, right? You just need regular exercise, 30 minutes a day, right? Could be a brisk walk after work. It could be whatever you're doing, but it needs to be deliberate, right? A healthier diet, right? Get off the sugars, and then knowing how to get a good 7-8 hours night sleep, right? Those three things, and we've seen it in 2 or 3 weeks where people have just adopted the health trinity. Their response to external stresses, they're like, Brody, I cannot believe that those three things has made all this difference,
Yeah.
right? And then if you build on top of that financial literacy, communication, growth mindset, and purpose, which is all Maslow's hierarchy, right, of basic human needs, it knocks it out of the park, right?
Yeah.
But these are things that, you know what, if you take back agency, and this is what people don't realize. It's like, you know what, you're giving all your agency over to an external. When you say, I'm stressed out, there's nothing I can do about it, it's like you've just, that in itself is worse for your state of mind, because you've just
Yeah.
given away all your agency, so you feel powerless.
You're at the effect of, right?
Exactly, right. So it's like, you know what? There are certain things that you've got full agency over. What time you go to bed, what time you get up, what time you put your mobile phone away, what you put down your gob, right? And what you do outside of work hours, where you might want to go for a walk around the block after tea instead of just sitting yourself in front of the telly, right?
Yeah.
Or bloody scanning social media. So it's all about life habits.
Yeah.
And as soon as people start doing that, by default, they feel better about themselves because they know that they're doing what they should be doing anyway.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's the first step into personal responsibility, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like, you know what, and I'm sure it's going to come. I can't share too much in this forum, but what Peter knew 5, 6 years ago that was going to be legislated, we've now got a solution for. Right?
Yeah.
We also know what's coming in another 5 or 6 years, where when it comes down to people having a shared legal duty around psychosocial risk factors, like they have a shared legal duty around physical risk factors.
Mm.
So that conversation is fast going to change over the next few years, that an individual who wants to take a month off on stress leave and expects somebody's going to pay the bill,
Yeah.
that might be a different conversation in a few years' time.
Yeah.
If they can't provide evidence that they've met their shared legal duty and they've implemented some good habits that will see them in a good, healthy state of mind, so that
Yeah.
the stress at work isn't compounded with the stress of life.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, John, and I'm sure your listeners have seen it. People can handle stress at work, they can handle stress at home, but they can't handle both.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need a safe place, you need an escape somewhere.
Well, and also, how much of that stress are they just creating themselves? You know,
Absolutely, right?
it's
Yeah,
like,
it's all about good habits, right? So
yeah.
I used to bang on to Dave about this all the time. It's like, mate, it's about habits. It's about routine. It's about discipline, man. Oh yeah, but I don't feel. He came in one day. It was during COVID, and our team had just put a little video together, just educating people on working well from home. So it was a little animated 3-minute video that said, "Hey, you're not going to work, but here's a little video that's going to help you work well from home." Right? Start your day strong. Set up a workstation with books or whatever, so it's ergonomically friendly. Communicate with your family members that when you're sat in that seat that might be on the end of the kitchen bench, that is your work zone. So you can't be, so we just, and it went viral, right?
Yeah.
I'll share it with you if you want, John, because there's still a lot
Yeah.
of people trying to navigate that now that they're working from home a lot more. But
Yeah.
anyway, Dave's doing all this stuff, and he's like, yeah, but Dad, I know all that stuff. I said, Dave, here's a quote for you to remember: to know and not to do is not to know.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I don't even know what you mean. I said, go away and have a think about it. I said, you can know everything. I said, but if you're not applying what you know, you might as well not bother knowing it.
Yeah, very true. Very
And
true, mate. Now we've sort of got
yeah,
to
we're probably timed out, haven't we?
well, we have, and I just wanted to lay a thought with you, because maybe we'll catch up and do this again, do a part two, because I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of rich stuff here, and construction industry is something that we both have a passion for.
Mm.
I was contemplating this whole thing and what it would mean to society to have more men step into that really healthy masculinity where they can be trusted, where they can be there for support, guardianship, care, all those beautiful things that men can bring to the table. And I'm leaving this with you and for my listeners as a thought. I watched a video many years ago, and I watched it again on the weekend, about what happened to Yellowstone National Park
With the wolves.
when they brought the wolves back.
Yes.
Huh?
Yeah.
And I just reckon that our society needs a few wolves,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll share you mentioned about Guardian. Now Don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
So that tattoo is a guardian band.
Right. Wow.
And it's what they used to tattoo the guys in the clan that were deemed trustworthy to look after someone else's kids if the guy doesn't come back from battle.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's you know, on a kid's document you've got parent/guardian who have to sign
Yeah.
on behalf of the kid, and that's where guardianship comes from.
Right. Gotcha.
And so I'm all about, and I know, like I say, and the cloth that I think we're cut from, mate, is a really good strong Scottish tweed.
Okay. I'll
Right.
agree with that.
It's waterproof, it's rip proof, it's everything proof.
Yeah.
Right.
Gotcha.
But it's about,
Wow.
well, who else wants to sign up to wearing that tweed, right?
Yeah.
And we got some wristbands made up when we were going out doing Braveheart talks. And I'd give them out to people, say, look, I actually gave one to a guy in the tram the other week. The guy was having a bit of a psychotic episode, and everybody stays away from him. So I go and sit right next to him.
Mm-hmm.
And he sits and looks at me, and I've got my sleeves rolled up. I'm going to a meeting in the city. He goes, like your tattoo, mate. I said, oh, thanks, mate. I said, do you know what it is? He goes, nah, looks Celtic. I said, hey, it is. It's a guardian band, mate. Anyway, at that, he rolls his sleeves up and shows me this really beautiful Celtic cross on the inside of his forearm. Anyway, and this guy's shouting, and everybody's looking everywhere else, right? Out of the tram. I'm sat there. I said, whoa, wow, what a bloody great tattoo, mate. And anyway, just as he noticed I was wearing a Braveheart wristband, right? That's got the Guardian band design on it. Anyway, just as he's getting off the tram, I said, here, mate, take this. He goes, what are you giving me that for? I said, well, I don't expect you to go and get tattooed straight away. I said, but I want you to be going someone else. I want you to go and become someone else's guardian today.
Yeah, wow.
And he looked at me, he goes, do you think I can do that?
Wow.
I said, mate, I said, you've experienced more life than most people in this tram combined, mate.
Yeah.
I said, yes, you can be someone's guardian. And the first person you need to become the guardian of is yourself.
Yeah, wow.
Anyway, he got off, the tram stopped. He got off, he met another mate who was a bit high on stomach. Anyway, he's waving the wristband at me, and he's waving as the tram sets off, and everybody then turns around and looks at me and say, what the bloody hell just went on there? But again,
wow.
it's about meeting people where they're at, right? Without judgment. Right? It's
Beautiful, mate. Absolutely.
saying, what's that saying? Their but for me go I.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure catching up with you, mate. I know it's been
absolutely, mate. We will definitely do this again. And
yeah.
so I think we've only just scratched the surface today, and there's so much we can talk about. So thank you so very much. And, really stemming on from your guardian point, I just thank all of our listeners for tuning in. Please don't forget to share it. And in line with what David just shared with us, when you're out there in the world, be that adult that you needed when you're a kid and you're in trouble or you're distressed. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, David.
Yeah. No, you're welcome, mate. I invite everybody to be an active bystander.
Wonderful. Beautiful. Thank you.
God bless you, mate.
Take care, bud.
Ta-da.